Do you hear that? So 2 seems to be all right. I know it makes you in the traffic.
But 2 is fine. I accept it.
We'll see what Effie says. He'll come at 3:30. So we have until 3:30.
Okay. So I'm sorry that this doesn't exist in English.
Or do you want to do supervision now?
What is it?
Since
Medrash. I thought we were doing a little bit of Medrash until yes.
Thank you. Well, Medrash on what?
On the Parsha.
On the Parsha.
Yeah, that's what we did the class before I left.
We did? I wouldn't know. I wouldn't remember.
How is the supervision going to look?
Yeah, can you want to start with it now? Because people...
No, so we're live. So let's do this first. Okay? So we started this one. And people already joined. There's a whole bunch of people. You didn't get a chance. Yeah, sure. Yeah, just okay, so what we're doing is we're learning how to use the Medrash, to...
Turn off so you don't wind up getting blasted.
So we're learning how to use the Medrash as inspiration for what we're doing with people. So, I don't know if you remember what we did before, 6 weeks ago, but that's what we did. That was the last thing that we did. So this week I chose a Medrash from Medrash Rabbah on the Parsha. And I'll read it in Hebrew and then translate it. Rabbi Simon b'Shem Rabbi Eliezer Omer ba'arba shitin. So one of the mitzvahs in the Parsha is the mitzvah of v'chiyamuch achicha, that if a person becomes, what's the right word? So the translation is he falls from his status, meaning he becomes poor or needy in some way. Then you should support him. Patuach tiftach yadcha. You shall open your hand to him.
Is this from Bahar?
It's from Bahar. Okay. So, what do we do with this? That this goes into the whole issue. There was actually a lot of issues that came up in relation to this. But to know, and you'll see this, that therapy falls under this category of somebody falling from his place, falling from his status, wherever he is. And it doesn't have to be something physical. It can also be emotional. It can also be psychological. And that helping them, however we help them, is performing the mitzvah of tzedakah, if you want. Okay. By the way, this would definitely, even without asking anybody, it's pretty clear that if you would normally take, 300 shekels for an hour with somebody, and you're only taking 150, or if you should take 150, you're only taking something nominal. So that counts as tzedakah. That's like your meiser that you're giving. You should know that it's not just, even though you're not taking the money in, but it's like you gave it out. Because it's an act of tzedakah to help somebody else to rise from where they are. So when it comes to tzedakah, there's a lot of issues. And one of them, the one we'll talk about today, is the difference between what's called tzedakah and gmilut chasadim. What is gmilut chasadim? It's a word that's used a lot. What's the difference exactly? Okay. And this goes deeply into the issue of subject and object, which exists in every mitzvah, but especially in the mitzvah of tzedakah, as we'll see. Okay. So even before we start, I want to start with something a little bit different, but you'll see in the end that it hopefully will connect very strongly. I talk a lot about reaching a state of equilibrium between your divine soul and your animal soul. And why do I say equilibrium? Because it's not that when you're done with submission, with achna'ah, that you can simply cast aside your animal soul and say it's taken care of. He said that the animal soul always comes back with its demands, with its pain, whatever it's carrying around. The pasuk that reflects this very strongly is something that the Rebbe always quoted in terms of the Geula, in terms of the redemption, that redemption, whether it's private, personal, or general, has to include the ability to say, Odcha Hashem ki anafta bi, that I thank you, Hashem, I thank you for being stern with me, or even being angry with me. What does that mean? It means that the animal soul continues to carry the feeling that I've been wronged, or at least I was dealt with severely, even if it wasn't completely wrong. And it's the divine soul that says to it, but I still thank God for it, meaning that I understand why this was necessary, let's say. Okay?
But that still is hard. Just thinking God doesn't help produce
it's not.
the intensity of what keeps coming back, and that's what keeps tripping everybody up. It just keeps. There's no way to lessen it, or is there?
That's why I said it's not that it lessens in and of itself. It's that it reaches a state of equilibrium.
Eventually, over time, if you do this enough.
No. So I don't see it as a prescription. I see it as a description of a state. And the way that you reach this state, we'll talk about in a moment, but it depends on strengthening the divine soul enough that it can say the first half of the statement, that I thank you, God. If you can't, not the animal soul can't fully ever say, I thank you, God.
No, of course not.
Not of course not. We do want to reach a state of sweetening, and then it might be able to. But in general, the animal soul is always carrying around the pain. It doesn't really get rid of it. So it's a question of, is there anything higher, is there anything balancing it out and making it possible to carry that pain without it causing me to give up, to separate from God? That's the question. Can I create something that's strong enough as a counter to the feeling of having been wronged, or not receiving what I think I need to receive, and so on? That's the real equilibrium that we're striving for. So you remember the example that I gave a lot of times of why dieting never works for people that it never works for, because over time you can't do only submission. It doesn't work. You can't force yourself, you can't force the animal inside to just give up on what it feels. So if a person is eating because they're overeating because that's how they take care of their pain, that's how they make up for it, or whatever it is, so you can submit for a while, but eventually it won't work. Eventually. And everybody who loses weight eventually gains it back. Why? Because there's no counter to that need. You have to create something else, another identity, right? That's how I've been describing it for 6 years.
Another identity as in what?
A second identity is my divine soul, or in the case of like dieting, that I create an identity of somebody. No, it's not so simple. It's not.
There.
It's there in a very weakened state. In the same way that everybody understands that they should eat healthy food, but between understanding that as an idea, having that as a seminal idea, it's like something, right? It's just a seed in my mind, and churning it into a reality that that's who I am. I'm somebody who only eats healthy food. My body can't stand fatty, whatever types of food. I can't stand. If I eat it, I immediately have some kind of reaction. To get to that state requires a lot of work. It's not just an idea that I have to eat healthy food. It's something that I have to work on.
This reminds
And we
me
said
of-
we have to work on it over time. It takes months and months and sometimes years of spending time in the kitchen
Right, that's exactly.
and doing it, not just to reach the state where there's a counter to the need that the animal soul has to eat in order to alleviate the pain. Yeah.
What about, I'm just looking at it in terms of pleasure, pain, that, there's the pleasure in, let's say, the food versus the pleasure in improved health. And so in improved health,
Right.
what other benefits
Right,
you
right,
get from,
Mhm.
if your issue is staying up at night,
Mhm.
and there's the pleasure of tomorrow, I'll feel really refreshed if I go to bed now. Like there's a two, pleasure up at night, pleasure of getting a good night's sleep. Like weighing pleasure and pain, it's not a new identity, but sometimes just when there's mishigas going on that's let's say damaging to me,
Mhm.
that I'm doing it only because there's some pleasure, and I have to find where's the other pleasure that would convince me that would outweigh that other pleasure.
So, but that changes.
So that's not a different identity.
It doesn't help,
It's just
right?
finding,
It's just
finding where is the pleasure, where
Right.
is the pain.
and it's very topical.
Right.
And it's temporal. It'll change. Meaning tonight I can get away with not sleeping enough, so I won't. To decide to become somebody, let's say it's about sleep, to decide to become somebody who uses sleep in a certain way is in a change in identity. It's not because it's more useful to me or not.
Okay.
That's still the idea. It's like an idea that I have that this is better. Yeah.
So when you're describing the balance between the animal soul is carrying around the pain and the divine soul is thanking Hashem, what does the balance feel like internally?
Okay. So the way I see it is that the divine soul is like a mother carrying its child.
Carrying what?
Like a mother carrying a child.
That's how it feels sometimes.
It's supporting. It's giving room for it. It says, "Otcha Hashem ki anafta bi," for you have been severe with me. So I acknowledge the severity, the feeling of pain, the feeling of having been dealt with severely. And yet, what does the mother say? The divine soul says, but there's a purpose to it. It's not without purpose. Now, it's not without purpose. Don't let me finish without explaining what that means, that it's not without purpose, because that's the thing that,
Is that like tough love?
if it was just
For my
that,
best, it's for my good.
then right, so it's for my good, but then we come up with a series of questions. But before we get into that, I just want to tell a story that that there was a big Talmud Chacham that passed away just before Pesach. His name was Moshe Shapira. And he was a very interesting man. He was considered the Rebbe of the Litvish world, if you want. Like that, in the Litvish world, there was one person who was considered to be the thinker, the person that everybody went to.
Is this Kalonymous? No.
No. He had a lot of places. He taught something like 40 Shurim every week. And
It's his teacher, yeah. That was his teacher.
so he used to say something that I've heard quoted from a number of his students. Most of his inspiration came from Chabad. And he used to say, learn Chabad, but don't follow their ways. It was something that was said to his students. So he's one of the big propagators of Chabad Torah in the Litvish world, actually. So I just heard the story from him. Somebody, my wife said, it's like he waited for him to pass away to put the book out. I don't know if it's true or not, but a month after he passed away, this 500-page book came out with stories about him. So I guess, no, in Hebrew. So one of the stories, the person who wrote it related his encounter with him, his first encounter, and he was in his yeshiva in the 50s, and he had, this person who wrote the book and is telling the story, relates that he had come from the Soviet Union. They had gotten out sometime, I guess, after World War II. and everybody knew him as the Russian. So they laughed at him, and I guess he was about 17, 18, something like that, and they kept calling him the communist. And he was really, really hurt by it entirely. Mom's devastated him. And after a month or two of being in this yeshiva, he went to Rav Moshe and he tells him how painful it is for him that everybody's laughing at him with this name, the communist, and he so hates communism. Well, it's the most terrible thing in the world, and it's like calling somebody a Daesh terrorist or something like that, like today. So how come? What can I do? So he told him a story. He said, "Is a fresh egg something good?" So he's like, "Yeah, I guess so." So he says, "But you can't eat a fresh egg, even though it's fresh. You can't eat it. You have to boil it. You have to make it a little hard, even if it's not fully hard. You have to make it like a 3-minute egg or whatever it is." So he says, "Yeah, I guess so." So he says, "Don't you understand that that's what they're doing to you? You're too soft, and they're making you into something a little bit harder." And it says, "And if they don't make you into something harder, you're very good. You're a good egg, but nobody will be able to enjoy you. So you should give them thanks that they're calling you names. They're giving you self-confidence." That's what he told him. And he was taken aback by this whole approach. He says, "Like, what do you mean?" So he said, so this man who wrote the book, he said to him, again, he's like 17 or 18 years old. So he says, "Okay, so maybe they're doing me a favor, but what about the fact that they're cruel? What about there's no retribution in the world? There's nothing like that." So he said to him, "The only time you'll start living your life is when you stop trying to figure out what somebody else owes or doesn't owe to you or to heaven or to anything like that. That's the only time you'll that's when you'll start living. And before that, you'll only be stuck in all these." So he sort of gave him, in a certain sense, when I heard this from him, I thought that it's very, very similar to something that would be said in Chabad. So I guess it's a Russian outlook on life, that you need to be boiled to be any good. You have to be hardened in order to be useful in some way in the world. So these are easy things. What about things that are really awful? In the end, remember we talked about that the number one complaint that people have about their parents, well, sorry, not the number one complaint, the worst complaint they have is that they did something terrible to me, that they really did abuse me, or they caused in some indirect way for me to be abused. And we said that the answer is that really when it comes to that, you have to blame God. You can't, you're right, you can't, if you'll blame your parents and they're blameworthy because they caused it in some way, you'll never be able to heal. So you have to understand that God made them do it. That's how you have to see it. You have to, in the end, give it the things that are too difficult to carry, meaning it's not somebody calling you a name and just boiling you a little. The things that are really painful, the things that really are trauma in life, in the end you have to say God did it. So one of the things that comes out of that is that the fact that you're still here is a sign that God knows how to, He's the only one who can measure exactly how to break you without shattering you completely.
Who said this?
We said this a few weeks ago.
No, I mean who originally?
It's from Rav Ginsburg.
But
Where does it come from?
I mean, who's going to say blame God? Who said?
No, it's the idea that there are certain things, in the end you have to blame Hashem. Otcha Hashem ki anafta bi. You were severe with me.
In
She
chapter
said
26.
Okay, okay. Hashem is
came from Hashem.
Hashem is responsible for it.
But to blame
And no, it's an nafta. It's an acknowledgement that I'm really in pain.
really okay.
To acknowledge on the
It's a real trauma. It's not. It's no joke. It's real what he did to me. If I try to do it, if I try to place the responsibility on a human, I'll never have peace. Because who gave you the right? How can you? Who gave you the right to do this to me, and in general to another human being? But Hashem is a creator. It's something else. Hashem is big enough to carry that. Human beings are not big enough to carry it. That's the idea. That nothing can vindicate a human being having done something that caused me trauma. There's nothing that can ever make it right. The only thing I'll ever wish on him is that he suffer, that's all. And I'll never be free of that pain because of that.
I'll never grow enough, no matter what. I'll never have enough.
And there's no contra-argument. There's no counter-argument to what was done to me. It just doesn't exist. There's nothing like
Only
that.
parents and with other things.
With other things as well. In the end, but the real traumas that occur with parents, it's very easy to see that. Really, you have to say that I respect my parents. How? Because in the end, it was God who was responsible, not them. That's what it means. That I do acknowledge that there was pain and trauma, and yet I still think Hashem. So how do I think Hashem? I wanted to say this before we got to the question of what does it mean then that it's for a greater good. So what is this greater good?
So is this the divine soul?
Only the divine soul can say this. The animal soul continues to carry the pain. And you have to reach an equilibrium that allows the divine soul to hold the animal soul together. There has to be a greater force inside that can carry this without completely shattering it. It's like saying that you can't come to acknowledge even trauma until you're ready to carry it, to handle it. That's why trauma is so deeply rooted a lot of times that people don't even know what they're suffering from. Why? Because there's not enough, I'm calling it divine soul, to be able to even support the recognition that I've been through something very hard and difficult. So what is this divine soul? The divine soul, you said before, Chavi said, but it exists already. It exists, but it's not enough that it exists. Because how does it exist? It exists as a point. It's not developed. How do you develop the divine soul? You can only develop it through learning Torah, through serving God. There's no other way to develop it. It doesn't develop just because I grow. It's not like the animal soul. The animal soul, the fact that I'm alive, it grows. Sometimes the animal soul is described, that's how it's described, that the animal soul and the vegetable soul are very close. So just the fact that it's alive, it grows. But the divine soul is not that way. You don't gain in weight in your divine soul unless you eat something. So what do you eat? You have to eat Torah. If you don't eat Torah, nothing happens. You have to daven. If you don't daven, if you don't spend, you could say that the Torah is eating, and davening is like the exercise, to build the muscle mass. Yeah.
So the internal, I'm still trying to capture the internal experience. So the animal soul is going to say, oh, I'm reliving the traumatic experience. And then the divine soul says, it's from Hashem and it's all for the good. And then how is the balance reached? What is the balance?
The idea of therapy usually is that within the safety, within the setting of being with a therapist and somebody who's supporting you, you can come to acknowledge things that you can't do by yourself. So the same idea here is that within you there's a therapist, within you there is something that can contain this.
Not the divine soul,
And that's the divine soul.
like the mother would.
Okay.
Is this the psyche?
It's part of the psyche. It's,
Part of the psyche.
what it will mean for the greater good later depends on the person. What does that mean to them? And that is something that only the divine soul can really answer. That's why you need to learn Torah in order to go there. In the end, to really believe that after everything that Hashem has done to me, again, and the negative things that I feel that He's done, to believe that that Hashem is still good, it's not blind faith. And there has to be weight behind that statement. In the end, maybe there is blind faith in it, but there has to be a lot of weight. So, let me give one example of what this would sound like. So, mass.
Energy. Wait, what was the word you used before?
Force.
A force.
A justification, maybe.
Understood. Motivation.
Would you
Maybe.
just
Motivation.
getting closer? What's a better description?
So,
of what it has to be?
Significance, maybe?
Maybe meaning.
Meaning.
When you say
Meaning.
weight behind that conclusion, wouldn't that mean a lot of the internal work that comes through in therapy to be able to come to that final conclusion?
So a conclusion is a little hard because you're saying like
Clarification.
Spiritual experience.
Clarification of the sort of that it's all from Hashem.
let me ask you, why did you feel good when your mother took you in her hands? Why does a baby feel good? Why does a small child feel good? There's no understanding of what the mother understands or doesn't. There's a feeling that I'm being carried. That's the description also that Hashem. Now, what's the description of the divine soul in the Medrash? That it's like a father carrying the child on his shoulders. When Hashem says, then you learned, right? He brings the whole mashal of that you thought that I had left you, but then then suddenly you see that, right? Because there was only one set of footsteps. That's how it was developed by some people. But there was only one set of footsteps because I wasn't walking alongside with you anymore. I was carrying you. That's what the divine soul does. It's not necessarily that I understand fully it's not a conclusion or justification, it's that there's enough weight there to carry me. If the divine soul is tiny, it simply doesn't have the strength to hold me. It's much more than just, again, it's like a child clinging to its parent. The sense of security, the sense of strength, the sense of everything will be all right doesn't come necessarily from understanding what the parent understands. It helps, because eventually you have to do it for yourself. But doing it for yourself is exactly that. I'll say it another way. When you child comes with, I don't know, he scraped his leg, whatever, and then you hold him. So for him, it's really the end of the world because, you can't get a scrape and live. Nobody's ever lived after that. And it's not that you know different. It's just that you have more experience.
Right. So does the kid have to learn from experience, or can it be there right away? Can't be.
No, it can't be there. That's why he needs you, because you have the experience that, you know what? Most people have lived after that. Yeah. Nothing happened to them. Most diseases go away. Most bad problems go away. Most things do. In the end, people live here. I know a lot of people who are in old age. They lived. I don't know how, but they got through it. And eventually, when I go through it, I understand that in the end, Gam Zeyavo, this too will pass. So it's more experience than anything else. When it comes to the divine soul and its relationship with Hashem, it's not necessarily when somebody goes to a tzaddik, for instance, and they reassures him that this will be okay. So he doesn't give a reason. Doesn't tell him, look, this and this and this is it. The reassurance comes from the fact that there is, as it were, somebody who sees more. He doesn't have to give me the reason. That's not where the weight comes from. It's a feeling that this is somebody who's more than what I am. In the Divine Soul, it's the same thing. It's not necessarily that I have a specific answer to the question at hand.
It's not faith.
It might be that my Divine Soul grew because of faith, but its weight, its mass, its presence in my life is just that it's big. Not necessarily that I can ask it, so what's the reason for what I went through? I don't know what the reason is. So I do want to give, though, something of an example, because I think it's relevant to at least try to grasp some of this. It's sort of like, I don't know if you remember this, I must have said this sometimes, but if you don't have faith that this person can be okay, then you're not the right person to take care of them. I must have repeated that at least. Like you have to be able to hold them, and if it casts doubt in you, and you can't see how this is going to turn out okay, then you can't support them. How can you support them? Either you yourself can't. There's not enough weight here to go around. You have to be a presence. So one example of it is it's somebody who went through a lot of trauma. And because of that trauma, I'm not talking about a specific case, but I won't go into too many details. But part of that trauma, the result of some of that trauma, which was ongoing throughout their childhood, caused them eventually to become a Baal Tshuva. So what's good in that? You know what? I'll do it easier. About myself, I can speak. So when I look back at the more difficult parts of my life and come to terms with them, so what do I say to myself? I say, if this would not have happened, if these terrible, severe things would not have happened, I wouldn't be where I am today with my wife, with my children, in my house, with my Rav, with the Rebbe. None of this would have happened. Why? So, let's say I had a decision when I was 19 whether I'd come back to Eretz Yisrael or stay in America. Maybe if I would have stayed in America, I would never have suffered all the terrible things that I did. Maybe. But I look at it and say that my life would have been so different. So could I be who I am today if it wasn't there? If that was not the decision I had made or been forced to make or whatever it is? Somebody sent me an end of some movie this morning, like when I was just getting out of bed. I got this WhatsApp with a link, so I couldn't help myself. It's a friend who writes poetry, so I had to see why he's sending me the last 5 minutes of some movie that I'd never heard of. And it's a very strange encounter in Patterson, New Jersey. Apparently this is something new. I don't even know who this is, who made this movie. And at the end, I guess the narrator says, I remember a song that my grandfather used to sing to me. And the song had a line that says, would you rather be a fish? And then it goes on and he says, and it also asks would you rather be a pig? Would you rather be a mule? But the one line that stuck with me is, would you rather be a fish? And that's what it ends with. So I don't know what the movie is. But it sort of gives the same idea. Would you rather be something else than what you are? What do I mean? What I mean is that I have a firm belief that the place, and again, this comes from the divine soul. It doesn't come from the animal soul. Could never appreciate what I'm about to say. It comes from the divine soul, the understanding that the place that I'm in right now, which has Torah and has mitzvos and has at whatever level I'm doing them, that has family, that has what I have now, it is encompassing eternity. Why do I say it's encompassing eternity? Because when I say that Hashem is good, what I mean to say is that Hashem wants the infinite good, not just relative good. Absolute infinite good. What is absolute infinite good? He tells me in the Torah, he says that what will make your life good forever are the mitzvot. There's no other eternal good in this world. So I hope this means something. But it's saying that if I would have to come and judge what was good, I'd come up with a lot of answers. I don't think I'd come up with tefillin. I don't think I'd come up with Shabbos. I don't think I'd come up with any of this. And he's telling me, look, I created the world as a means to give you an eternal good. And what does that eternal good look like? And I look at where I am today, and I say, Baruch Hashem, I received that eternal good. Meaning, I didn't receive the eternal good yet. It's in the world to come, because then it's eternal. But here, I've been given the possibility, the potential, to spend every moment of my waking days doing something. And I realize that I don't think I would have come to that, even though my life might have been healthier, easier, many other things, and without a lot of the trauma, but I wouldn't have come to that if I would have stayed at 19 in America. It's true, maybe a lot of things that I call good I would have had. But this thing that he tells me, this is the eternal good, so I would have had, I'm sure I would have had it at some level, but not the way that I see it now. Not the way that I think I'm experiencing it now. Where do I get that idea? That the animal soul can't, I don't think can appreciate that. It's a weight that you carry around, that you're experiencing the best possible situation for serving God right now. This is it. There's no better situation. And everything that I went through is to bring me to this moment. And this moment is eternal. It's not that it is eternal. I mean, I'm using it to attain something that's beyond finite, that is eternal in its nature. That's not a statement that you can. It's not like a conclusion, like that I can now spend an hour proving this to the intellect, to the mind, to the animal soul, however you want to call it, to a scientist, the scientist in me, the mathematician. I don't know how to prove it. But it's a weight that is created over time. So somebody would say, yes, this is all just one big delusion. So I don't have a problem with it. It doesn't bother me that somebody looking from the outside will say this is delusional. Why? Because it allows me to create that balance inside that makes me productive. If I would be stuck in only dealing with the pain and the trauma and everything else, and be no counterweight or no parent there to hold the child inside, so I wouldn't be productive at all. I would be spending my days miserably. Maybe I would do some things because you have to eat in the end, but I don't think that I could have a good marriage. I don't think I could have good relationships with my children. I don't think any, because I would be constantly experiencing with nowhere to put all my kianaftabi, all the severity that I've experienced. Not that I've experienced such terrible severity, but whatever I experience, every person thinks that it's pretty tough. It was pretty hard. So and you build this counterweight by feeding and increasing the size of the divine soul, and the only way to do that is through Torah and prayer and mitzvot.
Can't you say it's a gift, though? Like it's gifted, no?
The fact that you have it is a gift, but whether it grows or remains the same size, that's up to us.
Right.
Okay, but the fact that I have it, yes, it's entirely a gift from above.
You have to work on it. You have to do your work.
Right. And it's simple. It's not so difficult. I don't think you have to learn Chassidus to get to this. It's just the fact that any a person.
You say Torah and mitzvah, you have to. What Hasidus is different?
No, I'm not saying. I'm saying that you don't need a specific topic specifically in Torah. As a therapist, I think you do need. I think when it comes to therapy, I think you need Hasidic sources to understand how you stand in that place consciously, with intent. And that's what we'll talk about in a few minutes when we get to the Medrash. Yeah.
Can you clarify when you said you think it changes in size? What do you mean by that?
It grows. The divine soul grows.
The divine soul can be developed. What you're trying to
All the time. It's developing all the time.
Did you mean
And if you don't feed it, it withers. And it.
Therefore, do you mean that the gift itself also grows?
Yeah, of course. It remains a point.
And you'd see that mainly in your decision making, right? Where, if you were looking for it, you could find it if you're making a higher level decision.
Could be.
perhaps, or a lower
Could
level.
be. Could be that it's also. I'm sort of taking the totality of everything I've experienced and saying, so, okay, bring out all the pain. What how much weight is there here? Can my divine soul carry this right now? Yes. I can. What's the sign? The sign is I can say, that I can say in the end, I thank you, Hashem, even for the severe times that I've gone through. The main thing is that in the end, my cheshbon, my accounting is done with God. It's not done with other people. The more severe something is, the less I'll ever be able to come to peace.
Mm-hmm.
Vis-a-vis somebody else, who I think is the instigator of that severity. A human being is simply not big enough to be able to, for me to be able to cope with what's been done to me. If somebody else did it to me, I'll never come to peace if I continue to hold them responsible. In the end, I have to transfer it to God and then do the cheshbon with Him. Yeah.
A quick quote I heard in the name of Rabbi Abraham Twersky who said, "Pain is inevitable, suffering is optional."
Okay. That already sounds very Buddhist.
Oh, yeah.
Suffering is optional. It doesn't matter how you handle the pain.
Okay, so the end of that story with Rav Moshe Shapiro was that they can only call you names. Whether you're hurt or not is up to you. Depending on how you take it. But I'm not saying about that. Let's say things that were not done by people, really done by God. Somebody is born with a handicap, somebody is born with, somebody has an illness that doesn't go, whatever it is. Those things are not, I don't know how easy it is there to say suffering is optional. Because you can run away from people, you can't run away from yourself. So even right, I was talking about that with my wife this morning. One of two things about Zusha. Zusha, either he was born without the capacity to completely experience himself, which is one option, but it doesn't seem to be the option. I think the option is that he did what it says in the first chapter of Tanya is about him, that he says that King David killed his evil inclination by fasting. So I think that the Alter Rebbe is really talking about Zusha. There's a lot of stories about Zusha that when he was younger, he wasn't the same way. That when he was younger, he felt very strongly that Hashem was. I don't know if he said it about Hashem, but he knew when things were going wrong. He knew very well, and he worked on it really hard. And I think by the time he met the Alter Rebbe, he was 60 and the Alter Rebbe was 20. So by that time he had finished off his capacity to continue to suffer. He did something. He created a real transformation in himself. So the reason I bring this up is because as we'll see now in the Medrash, when it comes to therapy, a tremendous amount of the tzedakah that you're doing depends on your presence, on your state of mind, and not so much on what you know or how much you say, or it's more how you treat the other person. It's more about the empathy. It's more about the caring. And you have to trust Hashem in that sense to give you the right thing to say and to lead the direction. And what's in your hands is more the approach, more the kavana behind what you're doing. So to stress this, because I don't think we've stressed this so much, and it comes very strongly out in the Medrash, as we'll see, that the main thing in therapy is the tzedakah in it, is the gmilut chasadim in it. And that's why it's so important, because, and by the way, it doesn't have to be that therapy is so, you all know this, it doesn't have to be so official. As we'll see, just taking somebody in for Shabbos can be the most therapeutic thing in the world. It's kind of, even just one time can make a tremendous difference in somebody's life, in feeling that somebody cares for them, somebody that they matter in some way. So let's see how this works. Yes. I don't have any more. I need mine. Oh, here I have one. No, this is. Wait, hold on. So, I do have one more. Yeah. I do. Yeah. Sorry, it came out small. I thought I changed the font size, but I guess I only thought I did. Okay. So now let's see this Medrash. So the Medrash is in Medrash Rabbah, Parasha Lamedaled, meaning the Medrash Rabbah is divided into what it calls parashot, but are more like chapters. And the section heading is 8. If I'm not 8. It is 8. 8. Okay.
What's the 8 part?
It's 34:8. That's how you write it. 34:8.
34:8 is Midrash Rabbah.
34:8. It's like the 8th paragraph or the 8th entry in this chapter. And it's very fitting because the whole chapter is discussing the person who's mach, who's fallen. And one of the things in this chapter in the Medrash Rabbah is the 8 names, the 8 synonyms in Hebrew for somebody who's poor, for somebody who's fallen. So one of them is dal.
Is that mach with a chaf?
Mem chaf, right? Ki amuch achicha.
You have to know what is Memcha?
Mem chaf is one of the 8 synonyms. Another one is dal. Dal is Dalid Lamed, which is 34. It's the number of this chapter. 34. It's Dal. So this whole chapter is discussing tzedakah and poverty and everything that has to do with that. Okay. So we're sort of. It seems like we're joining the discussion in the middle, but really this is something in and of itself. So Rabbi Shimon b'shem Rabbi Elazar Omer. So Rabbi Shimon said in the name of Rabbi Elazar, Omer ba'arba shitin. He gave 4 types. Shitin is like a type.
It's not like shita. No.
The word shita comes from that in the end. Really, shita is a line. But what it's trying to say is like 4 categories or 4 types. It's not used this is actually a very unique wording. The Medrash almost never uses it. It's more in the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi has this type of language to say there are 4 different types of something. But, okay. So it also indicates this is something apparently very early. So he says like this. First of all, there's the one who does chesed with somebody who doesn't need it. So who's such a person that did chesed with somebody who didn't need the chesed? This is Avraham mimalachei Hasharet. Avram, when he brought in the angels, the 3 angels that he saw, so he did chesed with them, because what does it say? It says, "V'hu omed aleim tachat ha'etz v'yochelu," that he stood over them under the tree, and they ate. He made sure, he was like their butler, and he made sure that they had everything they needed. It says the Medrash, "V'chi ochlin hayu." Did they possibly eat? They're angels. So Rabbi Yudan says, "Nir'in ke'ochlin v'shotin, v'rishon rishon mistalek." So they made the motions as if they're eating and drinking, and they would evaporate in order everything that they supposedly consumed. But of course they don't consume anything, they don't eat, but rishon mistalek, like they cause it to disappear one by one. So Avram was a butler and made sure that 3 people who didn't need to eat ate. So this is called doing chesed with somebody who doesn't need it. What kind of sachar, what kind of reward did he receive in return? So he says, "Aman yored lehem." They, in their time of need, the manna came down, ve'abe'er ola lehen, and the well came up. They also had water in the desert. Ve'aslav matzui lehem, and once a month the slav, the quail. It says once a month. The quail would come. V'ananei kavod makifin otam, and he made sure that they didn't need to buy clothing, and they were constantly inside these dry cleaning Chinese service. Ve'amud ha'anan nosea lifneim, and they had light guiding them, and a sign guiding them where to go. V'arei dvarim kal v'chomer. So kal v'chomer, if somebody, mi she'asa chesed mi she'eno tzarich lechesed para kadosh b'hu levanav. So it's kal v'chomer, it's a minor and major. That if somebody like Avram, who did chesed for people who didn't need it, who weren't really people, these angels, God gave all this in return. Mi she'oseh chesed mi she'tzarich al echad kama v'chama. So if somebody does chesed with somebody who does need it, all the more so what kind of return he receives. Okay. So we're not going to continue on for right now with the Medrash. We're just going to focus on this one. Okay, just this piece. Now to develop this a little bit further, so we have to see what the Rambam did with this. He did something very interesting with this Medrash. So I'm going to read it in English to save us some time. It's on the second side. And this is from the laws of mourning. The laws of mourning are just before the laws of kings and their wars in the book of Shoftim in the Rambam. And this is the very, very last chapter 14 in the laws of mourning. And he writes like this: "It is a positive commandment to visit the sick, comfort the mourning, to remove the dead, to bring in the bride, to escort guests, and to occupy oneself with all the needs of burial, carrying the coffin on one's shoulder, to walk in front of him, to eulogize, to dig and to bury, as well as to make the bride and groom happy, and to take care of all their needs. And these are called Gemilut Chasadim." Gemilut Chasadim. Like it's you don't have a. Why don't you have a copy?
No,
I didn't.
Acts of kindness.
Yeah, I'm just checking what.
No, I wanted you to see how it's written.
But I don't. Let's.
Gemilut Chasadim.
Acts of kindness.
Oh, it is in English.
Okay. That are done with one's body, that have no measurement. It says about them, the Mishnah says, Milut Chasadim en la shiur. It has no end, meaning you can always do more and it counts as a mitzvah. Although all these are rabbinic laws, they are included under the commandment, Ve'avta l'reacha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself. Meaning that all things that you would like others to do for you, you should do for your brother. But with your brother, and here they're missing a piece, whoever translated this, I guess didn't like the end, le'achicha b'torah u'v'mitzvot, to somebody who's like you in Torah and mitzvot. Okay. Anyway. Next he says, all these are Gemilut Chasadim. They're not called just Chesed, they're Gemilut Chasadim. They're not Tzedakah, they're Gemilut Chasadim. We'll see in a moment what the difference is. And now in this...
that we say in the morning, דברים שאין להם שיעור.
הפאה והביקורים והרעיון הוא גמילות חסדים. Right?
So here is it.
Now he says, I have to read it in Hebrew first because the translation I see is not exact. שכר הלוויה מרובה מן הכל. The reward for accompanying a guest is greater than all others. והוא החוק שחקקו אברהם אבינו בדרך החסד שנהג בה. And this is the statue that was established by Avram, our father, and the way of chesed that he followed. Ma'achil ovrei drachim, that he feeds the travelers, umashke otan umelave otan, and he gives them to drink, and he accompanies them at the end. He accompanies them out of his house. Hospitality to guests is greater than receiving the divine presence. Okay. Meaning, offering hospitality to a guest is more important than acknowledging the Shekhinah, if you are one of those people who sees the Shekhinah. Okay? So you have to leave the Shekhinah in order to acknowledge a guest. Not just to acknowledge him, but to give him hospitality. As it is written, says the Rambam, he, meaning Abraham, saw, Vayar Avraham, V'inei shlosha anashim, and behold, there were 3 men. It doesn't say Vayar Avraham, it says Vayar V'inei shlosha anashim. Behold, there were 3 men. Incredibly, this is not what the Talmud says. The Talmud says the same statement, but it doesn't bring these 4 words, it brings the rest of the verse. Because really these four words, they have nothing to do with leaving the divine presence. Because what did he say right after he saw them? He says, Anna ta'avor, Adoni, Anna ta'avor ma'alavdecha. He says, Master, do not leave your servant. And there's a question about who he's talking to. Is he talking to these 3 people, telling them, don't pass over my tent, come on in? Or is Adoni here really saying, he doesn't say Adoni, he says Adonai, which is in the secular sense, in the non sacred sense, means my masters, the plural of my master. So he's saying it to the people. That's the pshat. But Rashi there on the place says that there's a question about whether this word here is God's name. Is he addressing God or is he addressing these people? And if it's the sacred form of Adni, Av Daled Nun Yud, this name, then he's saying, who is he saying it to? He's saying it to the divine presence because he had just received prophecy or he was in touch with the divine presence. And he says to it, please excuse me, but don't leave, because I have guests that I need to attend to. So he's saying to God, excuse me, what would be, by the way, I think that what would be the equivalent today, that if somebody's in the middle of Shmoneh Esrei, and he hears a knock on the door, he has to stop. His mamash, he can't, because it's more important than that. So I don't know if this is the ruling or not, but that would be like the equivalent of what Avram did. So there, those words say, why does the Rambam say, he saw 3 people? He saw and behold, there's 3 people. How does that prove anything? It doesn't prove anything. But this is what the Rambam changed the Talmud, and he brought the first 4 words of the verse that seem to not even relate to what he's talking about. Accompanying the guests out of the house is greater than showing them hospitality. And it's even greater. Now this is amazing. So to offer hospitality, I can leave the divine presence, but then to accompany the guest out of my house is even more important than the hospitality that I offer them. So accompanying a person says the Rambam, is the greatest form of Gemilut Chasadim that you can have. It's even greater than burying somebody who has nobody to bury him. It's everything. It's the most important thing.
What do you mean,
Very
just walking around?
So there's a there were all kinds of people who were very meticulous about halacha, that they used to, even today, take somebody for 100 meters out of their home. They would make sure that they walk with him. Theoretically, it's not needed today. Why? Because if you're in the city, if you're not in the city, it is needed. I mean, if you live on some hilltop in Yudav Shimon, maybe you can do it b'pshat. In the city, it's kind of strange. Why? Because why do you really need to? The whole idea of accompanying was theoretically, that's what it says. And here he says it, the sages say, all who do not accompany, strike out the dead here, which is a big mistake, all who do not accompany the guest, it is as if they have shed blood. Why is as if they... For instance, this is a translation from Sephariah. So it's like an open source thing that everybody can translate text. So I don't know why the person who translated this had in his mind that all the accompanying here is accompanying the levaya of a person. You need to understand that it's the levaya of a guest.
But maybe we're making
No. Just strike it out. No. Don't go there. Don't go anywhere.
We did start with morning.
Sedel. It's just to say that that's where he added the laws of Gemilut Chasadim in the 14th chapter of mourning, because mourning is the bigger mitzvah that has Gemilut Chasadim in it. That's all.
But I'm sorry, I'll let it go in just a minute. But
Should let it go now.
Clarify though. Could it be that in the initial discussion about the commandments around accompanying the mourner, perhaps the accompanying the dead body is the bigger part of it?
No. So there's no accompanying the mourner. There's only accompanying the deceased.
Dead body.
And it's not
Escorting
accompanying.
the coffin.
And there it's not the levaya itself.
Okay.
There it's always taking care of the deceased's body, meaning burying him. Doing the tahara and burying him. There's no need for a levaya. You don't have to.
That's not a bigger part of the mitzvahs related to mourning.
Yeah. Okay. So just strike it out. And whoever's watching the video doesn't even have to see it. Doesn't have to hear that. Even somebody wrote this strange thing here. Okay. So why do you need the accompanying? To protect the person from bandits or whatever it is, that they wait for somebody to come out of the house and then they attack him. So you accompany him. Yet still, the Rambam makes this into such a big deal that this is the greatest form of Gemilut Chasadim that you can give, because hospitality is greater than receiving the Shekhinah, than acknowledging the Shekhinah, and so on. This is the greatest. He says the reward for accompanying is greater than all others. And this is what Avram was known for. This is what made Avram into an Ish Chesed. This is his Chesed. This is his attribute of loving kindness. Okay? So now the question becomes, the real question is, how can you possibly say that you learn such an important thing, the need to accompany somebody, or even the hospitality, as a form of Gemilut Chasadim, from a case, like the Medrash says, where they didn't even need it? That doesn't make sense. You should give an example of where somebody needed something and you gave it to them. That's an example of Gemilut Chasadim. Why would you say that Gemilut Chasadim is when Avram is giving hospitality and accompanying angels who don't need neither the hospitality nor the accompanying at the end of their visit?
Because he didn't even think about it. It was just natural.
But from that we'll learn something. That was a test for Avram, let's say. But how could I learn something?
It's like covering the challah during Kiddush.
Yeah.
That the learners in kavod. The challah needs covered. Oops. No?
Okay, you're going in a certain, develop that. What are you saying?
It develops in us
So-
to make it.
So there.
It's really important.
So.
You will explain.
No, you're saying it. It's just.
Say it more. She keeps saying
No, she said it fine. I think what you're trying to say is that Gemilut Chasadim, because of this medrash and the way the Rambam wrote this, for instance, the Maharal, he draws the distinction between Chesed and Gemilut Chasadim. He says, you see that the Rambam uses it almost interchangeably. He says Gemilut Chasadim is all these things, and the specific thing for which Avram was known as a man of loving kindness, of following a path of loving kindness, is this act of hospitality towards his guests. So acts of loving kindness and chesed go together, and loving kindness itself go together. What's the difference, says the Maharal? He says, the Gemilut Chasadim, the fact that I'm a Gomel Chasadim, relates to who I'm doing it to. It's an act of kindness. But to be chesed, like he says about Avram, that's how I am. And it's not the same thing. We'll see an example in a moment.
Wait a minute.
You'll see in a moment why this.
So that's why chesed that comes from just the nature of the person to be chesed is lower, because.
Or what if somebody does Gemilut Chasadim without even intending to? Could you do Gemilut Chasadim without intending to?
Not if you're related
course.
to the person who's.
Oh, so maybe, what if I don't know the person that I did the Gemilut Chasadim for? The Gemara brings an example. It says, not the Gemara, the Medrash Halacha, the Sifra. There's the same mitzvah that we have in our parsha, there's again in Parshas Rei. So the Medrash there says, it gives an example, and Rashi quotes it also, not here, in a different place. What if somebody lost his purse, his wallet, and a poor person finds it? Did he do a mitzvah of tzedakah or not?
Did who do the mitzvah of tzedakah? The person who lost it?
Yeah.
He didn't do it intentionally.
He had no intention of giving it tzedakah, but there's no signs. It's just money, clean money, no signs, nothing. It goes to the person who found it. So did he get the mitzvah or not? So there's a machlokas in it, like everything. There has to be a machlokas. There's two opinions. There's actually even more than two opinions. But in the end, it seems that we rule that you don't have to have intent in order to perform tzedakah. So here's a case where there's no chesed involved. The person himself had no intent to do goodness towards somebody else, and yet they did a tremendous act of loving kindness, and we acknowledge it as an act of loving kindness, even though I didn't intend to.
That's Gemilut Chasadim?
And it's still considered Gemilut Chasadim.
So you don't intend to?
Even if you didn't intend to, even if it happened without your knowledge even. You have no knowledge of it. What's another example of this? This is in last week's Parsha. That when you have a field, you have to, if you forgot to cut a certain piece, it's called shichacha. I forgot. And I leave it. What does it mean I forgot? I don't even know where it is.
It becomes a mitzvah.
It's the mitzvah, it's a gmilut chasadim to the poor person who comes and takes it, even though I don't know who they are also. By the way, I'm not allowed to be there. And mamash can't be near the field when the poor people come in and cut it. Because why? No, it says not because of that. Because I shouldn't receive anything in return for the tzedakah that I'm doing in this case. It belongs entirely to them. What does it mean? Can I give, let's say I have $100 that I have to give to tzedakah. Am I allowed to give it to my neighbor who I like? As opposed to somebody else? Of course. When it comes to tzedakah, I can give it to whoever I want, even if they're going to owe me a favor because of that. There's no problem. If they need the money, it's tzedakah, that's it. They'll be nicer to me in the hallway? So whatever it is. But in these mitzvot, leket shichacha peah, everything that has to do with the field, it says that it belongs entirely to the poor, And Chazal learned from that I'm not allowed to take anything in return for this tzedakah that I'm giving. So the halacha is that I'm not allowed to be there when they come to cut it down, so that I don't favor one person or another. I'm just not allowed to be there entirely. So here's an example of lechatchila. The Torah says you can't know even how much you gave. You forgot it. That's the whole idea, that you don't even know what's there, and you give it away to somebody that you don't know who they are. And that's tzedakah. It's gemilut chasadim. It's part of gemilut chasadim. So says the Maharal, these are two different things. My intent and the mitzvah are two different things. The mitzvah of gemilut chasadim. My intent is the chesed. That's the character trait of the person when he does intend to do loving kindness. And then there's the gemilut chasadim, which is the act itself. Okay. Yes.
If we could just go back, I have this question. So, where it says about hospitality to guests is greater than receiving the divine presence, and then the pasuk that's given, he saw and behold, there were three men. And it's a sikha from the Rebbe where the Rebbe says, like, how did Avraham know this? We know this because we learned it. But how did Avraham know? He was in the middle of communing with the divine presence. And the Rebbe says, because he saw the three men, because he saw them, it was like, he wasn't looking around, he wasn't bored, he wasn't, the fact that
in front of the divine presence.
So my question is, but what is the proof that accompanying is greater than hospitality? And this pasuk doesn't teach us that, so how do we know that?
That's the end of the sikha. You didn't read the end of the sikha. That's exactly what that's where he's going. He's going to explain in that sikha what the Rebbe does. Maybe it's another sikha. But the sikha that I'm talking about, in the end, where he goes is to explain why this explains. They're related one to another. He says, the Rambam brings this part of the verse and not the end of the verse, which would seem to prove it, because he wants to show something very specific about what it means to be a man of chesed. And that you learn not from the fact that he favored the guests over the divine presence, which would be the part of the verse that he doesn't quote, but rather that he even saw them. He's going in that direction, so we'll get to that in.
But what about why the accompanying is greater?
That's what we'll see.
We didn't get to
But that's exactly the question.
Okay.
That's exactly the question.
Could we extract from this the fact that since they didn't need the food or drink, and they did need the accompanying, that in this case, Dafka was...
They didn't need the accompanying. Why do angels need accompanying?
Well, they certainly didn't need the food or drink, but the accompanying is very nice.
Oh, it's very nice. But the regular reason for accompanying, which is to safeguard, it's the same thing as the food and drink. They don't need either. But like she says, Avram doesn't know this. Okay? Avram doesn't know that in the beginning that they're angels.
The only purpose for the accompanying is to protect them from there.
Theoretically, that's what he says. That's what he says here at the end. That by doing so, you protect them from... That if you don't do it, it's as if you shed blood.
I thought it was more that you're giving them, that they shouldn't feel... When a person leaves and they've been sort of...
Exactly. You're already...
They leave and then you're like, they feel missing, that they had this special experience, and now they're sending them off to the great outdoors where who knows where they're going to go.
100%.
Like, then you really are giving them something.
The point here... Okay, so let's cut straight to the point. Okay. Usually, in every mitzvah that we talk about, there's the person doing it and the act. Right? The gavra and the chefza, the object of the mitzvah. That's how it was usually described. We've said a few times here that in Chassidus it's split into three parts, not into two. So there's the po'el, the person who's acting. There's the pu'ula, the act itself. And then there's the nif'al, which is, how you would translate it, is the result. The first thing to know is that there's a difference between mitzvos ben adam lechavero and ben adam lemakom. That the mitzvahs that govern the relationship between man and God are different than the mitzvahs that govern the relationship between man and man. When it comes to man and God, what I'm responsible for is only the act, but not the result. Obviously. What does it mean I'm not responsible for it? That in the end, the result is not the primary concern. An example: if I have a commandment to keep Shabbos, and I did everything I'm supposed to do, but something disturbed my Shabbos, so I'm not responsible for doing another Shabbos. I don't need to do it again. If I daven, that I'm responsible for. I do the act, but my davening is not so great. I don't go back and redo it. I'm not responsible entirely for the result, because the result in the end, because it's governing my relationship with God, the result is in, you could say, in Hashem's hands. But when it comes to the mitzvahs that are ben adam lechavero, that govern the relationship between people, I can't say that the result is not my responsibility. In fact, you might say the main thing is the result. To say it another way, that if I'm offering hospitality and I do everything that's supposed to be done, I give a bed, and I give food, and I I accompany, but everything that I'm doing how? In a way that speaks to the guest, you are wasting my time. I never say it, but that's what they feel. They're a burden. So that's not hospitality. It's a tremendous thing that it's about, when it comes to the relationship, the mitzvahs between people, it's about the direct result. Was the result that the person felt that he was welcome?
And so, if they didn't feel welcome, you didn't do the mitzvah.
Then you didn't do the mitzvah. Because the result is, you can't say ben adam lechavero that okay, I did what I was supposed to do. I'm yotze zayin. What do you mean you're yotze zayin? You're yotze zayin depending on the result. Technically, maybe you did something. But you can't say, well, it came out however it came out. It makes it a little complex. So, because how do you know how much is enough? So, an easy rule of thumb is that, and that's why he says it here, "V'ahavta l'recha kamocha," that it's all from "V'ahavta l'recha kamocha." Do to others as you would want done to you. What does it mean to feel welcome? The way you would like to feel welcome. You don't have to make it into, what do they call it? Etihad Airways. Right? You don't have to make it like some Gulf company that they want you to feel like you're the king, maybe. But you have to make it such an environment that you would have felt welcome also. That's what it means to perform a mitzvah, ben adam lechavero.
And the walking out.
Oh. What's special about that?
Feel like they're trying to get rid of you.
So especially, on the contrary.
I understand, but...
On the contrary, that especially, let's say, in the city where it's not even needed, the fact that you can continue to accompany them is a sign of what? That I have genuine interest in you. It's saying that the most important part of achnasat orchim is not what you serve, it's not how much food there is. He's saying clearly that the levaya, the accompaniment, is greater than everything else that you're doing. Why? Because there you see only the way that I see you. I mean, that's what comes out. The way I treat you. That's what comes out. It's the empathy. It's the connection. That's what ben adam lechavero is. It's not. It's almost like saying, especially you need to say this to people that are responsible for the food. It doesn't matter how much food there is. it doesn't matter how great it is. It's how much you can have all the best food in the world, the best bed in the world, and you don't take time to take interest in who's there, then the result is not hospitality. The result is just, I'm Yotzei Zayin because this is what I need to do. The same thing, so let's say about Avram. So let's say Avram knew, and he already knew that they were angels. At some point he knew already. So if he knew already, no, he'll do the. So if he knew already, and he continued to wait on them, to be their butler, to do everything, and in the end he even accompanied them. So what is he saying? He's teaching me, says the Rambam, that the most important part of any mitzvah of Gemilut Chasadim is the approach, is my intent, is how I relate to the other person. That's why he says that even if you give tzedakah and you look down and you're not happy about it, you lost everything. And it's interesting, the Medrash starts with this example. You would almost say, also about the Medrash, I could ask the same question. Why is the Medrash starting with an example of somebody who did kindness to somebody who didn't need it? Avram giving the angels who don't need it food and water. Why? Because that's what determines, that's what it means to lift somebody up. Milut Chasadim means that somebody is mach, somebody is down, and you're lifting him up. So what is he saying? He's saying the most important thing that you can do is the interest that you take in somebody. Much more important than everything else. So I think you see right away how this relates to therapy. That it's not whether I'm a genius who knows what to say. It's not necessarily whether I know everything in the world. I may not. A lot of people don't. And yet, what the sachar, the reward, comes from the approach, from the fact that I care about you. That I'm giving the time not because this is my occupation, even if it is. And when a person feels that, that's what he's saying. That's what it means. That's the essence. Essence of Gemilut Chasadim is to lift somebody up. That's what lifts them up. It's not so much even that I gave you something to eat, I gave you something to drink. It's the fact that I care. So now let's take it to the divine soul and the animal soul. So I'll go back to the example that you gave about a mother and a child. What's really special about parents and children in normal situations is that these are the only two people in the world that will ever care. That's what's special. They will go out of their way because they care about you.
Who, mothers, you mean? Mothers and God?
Mothers and parents.
Mothers and
fathers also.
Mutually.
That relationship is the essence of Gemilut Chasadim. After age 6, it's considered entirely Gemilut Chasadim from beginning to end. Why? Because until age 6, you say, it's almost you have compassion because the child can't take care of himself. But after that, the fact that somebody in the world still cares about you enough to go out of his way to hold you, to comfort you, to give you what you need. It's not even whether they can give you or can't give you, it's that they care, that they answer the phone when you call. And they'll never, ever screen you. Okay? That there's no such thing in that relationship. The divine soul with the animal soul is the same way. It's the reminder, my divine soul, the part of God in me, is a reminder that Hashem is always going out of His way to take an interest in me. That's what it means that I have a divine soul. I can take it for granted, or I can understand the way that you said very, very well before, and you reminded us that it's a gift. It's a gift from Hashem that I have something in me that can carry all the weight. that if I feed it enough, I grow it enough, it can carry the weight. And if I if I can acknowledge the fact that it's a gift that I have such a thing. Somebody told me a story this morning that the first time that they were in Crown Heights, they weren't so frum, and they had decided to go with their sister. It's a friend of mine who's a little older than me, and he decided, I guess it was sometime in the 80s, and decided to go with his sister for Passover in Crown Heights, but they didn't know where to go, whatever. In the end, they ended up at some uncle's house in Long Island. The uncle wasn't frum, and they weren't so frum either, but they wanted to be more. So he saw that he wanted to be in Crown Heights, this young man, his nephew. So he called a cab on the second day of Pesach, and he sent him with a cab to Crown Heights. So he gets out of the cab, and he comes out, and he knows there's something wrong with it, but he's not exactly sure what it is. And he says that, what is his name? Manus Friedman's brother, the one that lives in Crown Heights. No. Who's the other one? Avram's the younger one, but he doesn't live there. Who's the eldest there? There's a few of them. There's a whole row. Anyway, so he says he suddenly came out of his house, and he sees him stepping out of the cab, and he looks at him. He says, "No, well, come in." He took him in, and he was there for the rest of Pesach. And that was his first encounter. What is that? What does that say to me? He says, he said it was a trauma for him when he understood what had happened, because he had driven on Yom Tov in order to, and then that's how he performed his first Pesach. So I said to him, for a chassid, that's the best reminder in the world, that even the mitzvahs that I do, that I can do them right, is a gift from Hashem. You can't take it for granted. The fact that I can do a mitzvah, that I have tefillin that are, who says my tefillin are kosher, maybe they're not. But the fact that I have kosher tefillin, the fact that I know how to put tefillin, all these things, people who grow up from birth take it for granted, and a Baal Tshuva after a while also takes it for granted. That it's a given. What do you mean it's the easiest thing in the world? No, it's not. It's a gift also. To acknowledge that as a gift, that's the same thing as acknowledging the fact that I have a divine soul. That's a gift from Hashem, and that's my mother and father that can carry me. That's what David HaMelech means when he says, "Aviv v'imi azavuni v'Hashem yasfeni." That my mother and father are departed from the world; they're no longer here. So who's my mother and father? It's my divine soul. That's what's carrying me. I'm with it. It's holding my sins, meaning my iniquities, like a mother holds her child. That's the presence that has to come through in therapy. That I genuinely care about you. So I can't be a person's divine soul forever. But my purpose has to be to try to increase their awareness of their divine soul, so that eventually it can take over. It can take my role. But it won't need me. Because he has it in himself also, or she has it in herself also. We have to go on a weight building diet. You have to feed it. So in the beginning, it's showing first of all that this can be carried. That's exactly that feeling that, regardless of where I am and how bad it may seem, there's still somebody who cares. And not only that, not only do they care, but again, they're certain that this will pass. That reinforcement that I am sure that you will get out of this is the most important thing that you can give.
The therapist says, I'm sure.
The therapist.
Yeah.
You can say it or not say it, but it has to be clear from the stance that that's what I'm here for, to see you through it. Because it will pass, it will end. Or you die. So So it doesn't matter, either way. Okay. So there was a little bit more, but okay. So now I think we'll stop the broadcast and we'll switch to whatever else we're doing.